You are now listening to Stranger Times.
Hello and welcome to Stranger Times. I'm your host, Jacob Carson, and today we are joined by Andy and Art from Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time podcast. So, first of all, guys, how are you both doing?
Hey, Jacob, thank you. We are great. Thank you for having us.
Yes, we're happy to be here, shouting out and talking all the stranger tinians. What do we call your listeners, Jacob?
I don't actually have a name yet. I've been trying to kind of think of something that we can do. I'm kind of trying to play with this idea of maybe a field operators or something that they can kind of go out and monitor the skies for me, kind of thing. But we haven't got anything yet. But Stranger Time.
No. Stranger Timers.
Oh, Stranger Timers. Okay, yeah, it's not the worst either.
It's not the worst.
Not often said about my suggestions on anything.
But no, it's cool to finally talk to you guys, if I'm honest, because I'd say probably your podcast is one of the ones that kind of got me into doing it or even thinking about doing podcasts.
Wow. We apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, it's understandable, though. You would listen to Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time and then say, if that's a podcast, I obviously can do better than that.
Yes. No, that's very kind of you to say, Jacob. You've been a long-time supporter and a good friend, and you're a stand-up guy and a great designer. And we're happy to be here. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, because we've been chatting back and forth. I think I've suggested a few episodes to you guys, and obviously I've come to you when I was starting the Infinite Void and stuff on how do you even upload an episode and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of cool, if I'm honest with you, and it's weird actually manifesting it over a year and a half, but I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys coming on, and hopefully this episode can be a fun one. So for any of our listeners that might not have discovered you guys yet, what is Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time podcast?
Wow. Well, Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time podcast is the story of me, Art, and Andy.
That's you. I'm Andy.
A couple of years ago, we Andy and I are comedians, quote unquote, living in Chicago in America. And a long time ago, we were abducted by this illusionary mastermind and conspiracy theorist named Mr. Bunker. He started to kidnap us, take us out of our houses, and bring us to his bunker where he would force us to podcast about conspiracy theories, the paranormal, all things bizarre, high strangeness, UFOs, and unsolved mysteries. And basically, he is a true believer, and Andy and I are
we're a little more skeptical.
So he wanted to see if he could convince us or the world that his theories were true, and it's evolved from there. There's an expansive lore which you, Jacob, have contributed to in many different ways by sending in some different sightings or things or theories. It's really evolved from there.
Yeah.
Now, I've got to say, it's a really cool way of tackling, like you were saying, the whole high strangeness, bizarre world of things. Because I feel like probably a lot of people, when they're making podcasts, they don't really want to go down the conspiracy route, because it can be a little bit has crazy, or do you know what I mean? This kind of weird. Mm-hmm. Kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, but there's kind of this.
There's a line.
There's a little bit of a stigma, I think.
Yeah.
And I get branded as somebody who's maybe a bit off kilter.
Yeah, and I think that you guys coming up with this whole. Well, obviously you haven't come up with the story. It happens, and you do get kidnapped by Mr. Bunker. It's very true and traumatic for you guys, but I like that approach, because it's almost you don't want to talk about it, but you've been kidnapped to talk about it, and you probably do have a slight interest in it, and it's a good way of being able to talk about it. And I think it's just a really well thought out idea.
Oh, well, that's very sweet.
Very kind.
Yeah.
I'm glad that our pain and misfortune influences.
It's good to know that we're giving back to the world from which we've taken so much. And we'll continue to. Yes. Yeah. Unabated.
And I've got to say as well, like the amount of times that I've been just like crying with laughter at work on some of your abduction stories, and I've had to like get up and walk out of the office room or something for a minute because they're just so funny and random. Like every episode, I never quite know what to expect with you guys because it's like, how far is this going to go? And then obviously the lore goes a little bit further, and it's just madness, but it's awesome. It's awesome. So I did want to just give you a bit of a shout out for that because I do think, like, even communicating with you behind the scenes for the episode that I'm going to be doing with you guys on your show, like, you do put an insane amount of effort into like how it's going to go, what you're going to talk about, like parts of scripts, bits that you do, and I just think that it's very commendable. So I don't think many podcasts do that because they're like discussions like me, and it's all just about having a chat. So.
Wow, that's those are very kind words.
Very kind, Jacob.
Touches our hearts.
You are just too sweet. And hey, don't sell yourself short there. Infinite Void and Stranger Times and a few of your other projects. It's nobody can. We talked about it before the show as well. You got to give yourself a pat on the back.
You're a busy guy. You're putting in a lot of work too.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that because.
We're all just having a big hug fest.
Yeah, it's just, we're all just being super nice. It's a giant sausage pie in here right now. But, so out of all of the conspiracies and kind of topics and everything that you guys touch on, is there like a theme or a favorite that you guys like to do? Because I know obviously you do like UFOs, you've touched on like mysteries and high strangeness. So is there like something that you are more drawn to talk about or something that you enjoy talking about when you're covering topics? And are there ones that you don't really enjoy, but they kind of get asked a lot by your listeners?
Well, that's a good question. I think for me, probably the topics that I think end up being the most fun, which are then probably the ones I like the most, are probably cryptids.
Wow.
So, for anybody that, I assume if you're listening to Stranger Times, you're familiar with the concept of cryptids, but animals or creatures that are theorized to exist but have never been actually proven to exist. I don't know. To me, there's just something so fun.
Yeah.
And I feel like cryptids are one of those things. I guess generally I'm not swayed.
No,
by
you
stories
never are.
about cryptids, but I guess that's sort of
you're
my
not really swayed
personality.
by anything,
right? Yeah. Very sturdy. But
you're like a weeble wobble.
Yeah, I will tilt, but I'm not gonna give in.
You're not gonna fall down.
But I think that cryptids, I don't know, there's this element of possibility with it that I don't think always exists with other kind of conspiracies or unsolved mysteries. It feels like it's one of those things where it's like if you're thinking of something to say and it's just on the tip of your tongue, like these cryptids are just on the tip of existence.
Right.
And all you have to do is find one, and then it's
Right.
like, wow, that's crazy.
Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, or
Right.
these creatures. They're out there somewhere.
Maybe.
But we just can't find them.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's like a little treasure hunt. I think for me, I really, really, really enjoy some of the kind of more tangential alien and UFO stories. I liked talking about Bob Lazar. I liked talking about the Greys. I liked talking about, those kind of like extraterrestrial species sort of things. They're reminiscent of X-Files. It just feels kind of fun and comfy, and it's just like everybody's just having a good time. Whereas, sometimes when you talk about conspiracies or unsolved mysteries or murders or true crime events, it's like, oh geez, this is really depressing. It's still interesting. True. It's still fun. And I'll say this, these are the ones I love to hate are the kind of like consciousness based episodes, like the ones that are like, like we recently did Hollow Fractal Universe. And it's like, one of the reasons why I love to hate them is they are so difficult to understand from my perspective because we're uneducated swine.
Right.
And it's just very heady, and there's a lot of like high concept thought, and it's sort of like, we get a lot of messages of like, hey guys, great episode, but no clue what was going on. Like, yeah, we agree.
We don't know. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I would have to agree with that. I think they're really detailed. I don't know that there's anything that I really don't like to cover so far. I don't think there's anything that I've said, oh, I wish we would have never done that because I don't like that topic at all. I agree with Art. I think true crime sometimes can be a little grisly.
It's still interesting.
It's still very interesting, but it doesn't always make you feel the greatest to talk about things like that. But yeah, probably the really science heavy ones are the hardest for us. And I have a hard time sometimes wrapping my mind around that stuff. So those are probably the ones that are like the most difficult to get into for me.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm probably the same as you guys. I always find that ones that you can have like more speculation around, or you can like kind of think a little bit more, it is a lot more fun to talk about. That's pretty much why I started this podcast, because Matty didn't really want to get into all the bizarre side of things, and I really did. And I was like, well, we'll just kind of keep them separate. We'll do science there, and we'll do high strangeness over here.
Got it. Yeah, it makes sense.
That's interesting though. I'd say my favorite episodes from you guys are probably like the high strangeness ones, like Montauk Project, or the UFO ones, or like Philadelphia Experiment. I liked your Lucifer Project episode actually as well. That was quite fun when they were trying to turn Jupiter into a sun or something.
Yeah, they're trying to blow up a planet.
That's a really fun one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so fun to think about planets in our solar system being exploded and turning into suns and destroying life on Earth.
Yeah. Well, no, I'd actually agree with you, because I think those end of the world topics are usually quite fun to talk about. Because I think that's what everybody talks about when they like talk about the Anunnaki and stuff, don't they? With like Planet X and all that kind of stuff, and that's all just super fun. But one thing I would say about the whole like cryptid / ET races and stuff is, how are people like so specific with details?
That is
good
such
question.
a great question.
I wish we knew.
And we have had the same discussion, amongst ourselves at least about, I mean, I think for Art and I, as a listener, Jacob, this, we're always saying, why are all the alien races like humanoid?
Yeah.
Why don't let's, to me, it's like, anybody could say anything. Like, who's going to prove me wrong if I said, hey, gray aliens are 40 feet tall and their arms are machine guns and they have boats on their feet and their butts are spaceships and they just don't ever do anything except fly around killing and sailing. And nobody could say like, well, that's not right. Because it's like, well, it's just different species.
Yeah.
No, I don't know why everybody's got humanoid aliens. Let's get some weird aliens out here, huh?
Yeah.
Sentient cloud of bees or something.
No, I'd agree with you, because as well, it's like either they are true and everybody's seen them so many times that they can be that specific, or people are just, it's an endless possibilities of people just being able to make up what something looks like. But
yeah,
I think the whole like humanoid thing's interesting too, like being bipedal, because maybe from like a science point, that's the only kind of creature that could like have intelligence or be consciously aware of itself, kind of thing. Maybe like certain kinds of mammals or species are just that way inclined, so you couldn't get like a sentient gas cloud, but maybe you could, who knows? Because this is the other thing too, like this is what I like about the topic so much, is that we are like the only example. And that's why I find it quite funny on both sides of the argument when people are like, yeah, well, there's 24 different races and there's an intergalactic federation, and, the reptilians are eating babies and the whites are like kidnapping children and mutating cows. And it's like, okay. But then on the other side of it too, it's like, what does that mean? But you could also make the argument that it can't be possible because we're the only life form on the other side of it too. It just doesn't make any sense to me, because it's like the universe is so big. You'd have to make an argument that the fact that we exist, something else probably exists. Whether or not it's in contact with us is another story, or whether it can be. But it is interesting that the same kind of cryptids and the same kind of ETs always crop up with like their description and stuff. You know what I mean? It's a bit weird.
The thing we always say, and this is trademarked, said by us, is that there's a kernel of truth, a corn kernel of truth, in every single one of the topics that we and you cover, and that's what makes you come back for more. Because you're right, the universe is massive and constantly expanding. So who's to say that there isn't another race of bipedal humanoid-looking things from Zeta Reticuli or wherever And they could be out there. They could. You can't prove it wrong.
Yeah.
You can never, without a shred of doubt, prove it wrong. And that's what makes them so fun to talk about, because they're like never-ending loops. You can keep having that argument forever.
Yeah, and there's so many like new theories cropping up. Well, I wouldn't say they're new theories, but there's just so many different ideas at the moment for like the UAP phenomenon too. Like you've got, it could be ours, it could be alien, it can be interdimensional, it could be humans from the future. I just love that, because it just shows us like what kind of species we are. Like we just love thinking of the most ridiculous thing. But I do believe there is like a slight little bit of like, I don't know what you'd call it. Maybe you could call it like white man guilt on the whole like phenomenon idea. I think it's quite ingrained into Hollywood of like this idea that if something shows up, it's gonna destroy us. And I think we probably only have that because that's what we've done to every like settlement that's smaller than us, kind of thing.
It's the European colonization mindset that if anyone visits us, it can only end poorly for us.
Yeah, and I do believe that if there is anything out there and it does have the ability to get here, it's probably millions of years more advanced technologically and consciously, and it probably doesn't even cross its mind. We're probably just like two monkeys in a zoo throwing rocks at each other at the moment.
Right. You're right, and that's the theory of the Kardashev scale, which I think you're also a fan of, which is that if something truly was that powerful, they would be like so much more advanced than us that we would seem like ants under a microscope. We would seem so archaic, and just they wouldn't even like, we would be like a sneeze to like, it's like you wouldn't even, you know what I'm saying? Like it's like we would not matter. And we always come from it of this place of like human narcissism where we're like, wow, we would be very important to these other aliens. They would definitely want to take us over. It's like, would they? I think they wouldn't care.
we haven't even looked after the rock that we're on either. So it's just like, we don't want it. You guys keep it. It's ruined.
Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of science fiction, when whoever you're looking at in like science fiction, they can become aware of other life forms without ever visiting those life forms, right? They're like, oh, we're going to planetary scan or something like, and I have to imagine that if there were beings capable of travel between galaxies or even within our own galaxy, I mean, that could come to Earth and visit us, they probably don't have a real need to interact with us.
Yeah.
We don't probably have anything that they want. And if we did, they would probably just take it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these, we covered the Greys recently, and, the Greys supposedly have a deal with humanity. And it's in exchange for, they're trying to infiltrate our government and take over and, clone humanity and stuff. And it's like, if they can travel here in spaceships and stuff, why do they even have to do that? Like they could just destroy us. I mean, are we really that useful? I doubt it.
Yeah, that's one thing actually that I've always kind of thought about with the Greys, because isn't there like a whole idea around them too that like some of them are robotic, or they're like artificial biological material, whatever it is. I find that quite interesting, because it's like if they've got to that point and they can, because you can see humanity going that way. You might not want humanity to go that way, but I can imagine in like if you gave humanity 1,000 years, if we make it that long, we will probably move into like transhumanism and probably be a little bit robotic or uploading minds somewhere. And I can, if you got to that point, what would be the point in trying to become like the overlords of Earth? Do you know what I mean? Like if you can produce life forms that aren't biological or that are, but they're artificial, and you can travel across the stars, what would be the point in ruling the anthill? Because you can just go and rule all the other anthills.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
I mean, it's like from a astronomical standpoint, from a planetary makeup, I don't know, geological or whatever you want to say, is there anything that's so unique about the material on Earth that an extraterrestrial would say, that's the planet, I have to have that planet? There's like so many other, I mean, there's what, 7 other planets in our solar system.
We have Nutella.
Nowhere else has hazelnuts.
Hazelnuts and
This is
chocolate.
the hazelnut capital of the universe.
And a lot of sugar.
I mean, I just feel like, is Earth so unique? Like,
yeah.
I mean, when we start talking about probabilities, I mean, Jacob,
Yeah.
you suggested for us as a topic on Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time, the Fermi paradox.
That's right.
And, you've got the Drake equation. How likely is it that there are other races? I mean, depending on the math that you do on that, it's like there's a pretty decent probability that there's other intelligent, advanced life forms out there. So I think if we think about it in that way, why wouldn't we also think that there are other planets that are similar to Earth out there? I mean, I know that Earth is, at least from our observations, kind of a unique thing, but we can't see super far. Planets are hard to really understand from such a distance.
Yeah.
There's got to be other Earth-like worlds out there.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I think that's another thing too that I don't think gets brought up enough in this kind of conversation around the UFO phenomena, is just this idea of that we've only really had a technological / science explosion really in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And if you talk to your grandparents or your great grandparents, they might not even know that there's a solar system. Do you know what I mean? There's Earth,
Right,
the moon.
right.
Occasionally, they might know about Venus or Mars, but not in the terms that it's a celestial body, just because men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and it's a
Right.
book for their generation. But there's this whole explosion, we're learning now with exoplanets. We found all of those planets orbiting stars just in the Milky Way, and there's 4,000 or something. And it's
Yeah.
we don't even know the big picture to even ask the right questions sometimes.
Well,
And I
yeah,
think-
I mean, you and Maddie kind of cover that with Into the Void, and it's you guys do such a good job of talking about the technology. You did such a long series on AI, which is very fascinating, and something that I'm very fascinated in. And it's just think about that, trying to explain. AI is such a good example of it's only been around. Well, it's been around since the 50s and 60s as a concept, but
Yeah.
within true practice of what it can do, and regular people being able to, you can go and download EB Synth and or play around with different AI effects, or even Photoshop now has an AI effect that will use a copy of a photo and auto generate different profiles of the human face
Yeah.
based on what it's seeing in the photo. And so it's becoming more tangible now, and it's imagine trying to explain that to somebody from even 50 years ago or 100 years ago, which is that's nothing in the grand scheme of time. But imagine trying to explain that to somebody from 1900. It's it would feel almost like Cthulhian horror, because it's just, you can't comprehend it, right? It's extra cosmic or something. I don't even have a word for it.
I think Arthur C. Clarke said something like that, didn't he? He said anything that's
Great
any
name.
technology that is indistinguishable or something is considered magic. And that whole idea that if you took an iPhone back to the 1800s, they would think you were magic. And that you had this thing that could tell the weather, and you could predict things, and you knew everything that was going to happen.
The simplest thing that our phone can do, right? Send a text message, communicate with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, check the weather. It's that was so excruciatingly difficult back then that they would literally think you were a god or a magician or something, because it would just, they couldn't even, you didn't even have the means of conceptualizing something like that, because you never even thought that that's possible. But nowadays we think anything is possible.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And another thing that's quite insane about that is just the world that we'll probably be living in 50 years too. Because if it was to go down a whole AI route, and you have UBI in the future, and maybe people aren't required to work as much anymore because all the jobs have been took by either an algorithm or a robot, that would be insane in itself. Because I don't know about you guys, but I was of that generation where it was don't game, that's terrible, go outside, or do your homework, or gaming's never going to get you anywhere. And actually, a lot of people from my generation are extreme millionaires from streaming and being on YouTube and doing all that kind of stuff. And I just wonder how far we'll take it, because it seems like technology is invading every aspect of our life. And I can only imagine that it's going to become more. I was watching a program when they were having that one that you could feed it like Beethoven music, and then you could feed it like a Ramones song, and then it would combine both of those genres and produce a piece of music that actually didn't sound too bad. And like you had artists that would go through and like create art based off other people's art, and it was just all algorithm based. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but have you heard of a thing called GPT-3?
I don't believe I have, but
Is that some kind of a skin condition?
So, Andy, I know Art. Sorry, you should definitely check this out if you're interested in AI. But basically, it's kind of like a box that you just type text into, and you basically say to it like, create me a website with a red button, and on that red button it says click here, and when you click here it takes us through to this link, and the algorithm will look at what you've typed and it will code up a website for you, and then it'll just allow you to copy and paste that code into your own code and just have it there. And then if it gets it slightly wrong, you can be like, oh, I didn't mean that, or oh, I forgot to put in a contact form. Could you place a contact form here with these details here? And it'll just produce it for you. And that software is like free. I think it's on like a Google Drive that some teenager made. But
pretty incredible.
Yeah, and like if you can see that everything one day is going to be assisted with technology, then I can't even imagine where it's all going to go. But that's kind of like what fascinates me about this whole like UAP phenomenon. Is I don't know if it's just like me growing up playing video games and experimenting with like cheat codes and figuring out how the game works and seeing if there's like a back door that you can kind of take advantage of it, kind of thing. And I kind of see that with the whole like UFO thing, because there seems to be a lot of problems on planet Earth. And I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, we'll figure it out. Technology is going to solve everything, because I'm not quite sure if it will. But I do believe that if the UAP phenomena is real, which it looks like it is from some of the data that's coming out, I'm just baffled that we don't have like the greatest and best people trying to get their hands on it, or it being publicly known, because it would actually make us, it would like allow us to have the ego that we think we deserve.
That's true. It would be almost a validation of everybody who's ever thought, well, of course extraterrestrials would want to come here.
Yeah.
And I do agree with you a lot, Jacob. I mean, I'm usually one of, I as a listener of Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time, that me personally, I'm always like, well, I don't know. I don't really think, extraterrestrial visitation is a thing. But, with all the there's so many admissions now from governments about UAPs being an actual thing, that there are legitimately things that we don't know happening in the skies. I think one thing that's interesting too is we still don't know everything about the planet we live on, let alone, what's beyond the heavens for us. Some of these things could be like strange weather phenomenons we've never, properly studied or cataloged. I mean, weird things happening in the atmosphere that cause people to see something on the ground. Like there's so many possibilities aside from it even just being crafts. And I think it goes to show there's so much for us to learn still. But I do think that it would be pretty wild if it turned out to be actual extraterrestrial visitation. Boy, and I would look like an idiot.
Yeah, that's the best part.
It would be a little bit weird, wouldn't it, if it all turned out to be true? I often think about that, because I'm always the person in the room that's willing to be like, I'm not the guy that's like, they're here, they're abducting us, but I'm definitely the guy to be like, yeah, I probably favor more so that they exist than they don't exist. But it would be insane if they became true, because I think it's not just the cultural thing, is it? There's religion, there's like society, there's way of life. And I think for a lot of people, it would probably either shatter their like own existence or probably make them really fearful.
Yeah, I definitely think that there would be a lot of people on Earth who would be really afraid of what ETs might do if they knew they were existing. Because I think there's a lot of people who, no matter how much you said, they're here peacefully or whatever the case might be, whatever assurances, I don't know that people would totally trust that. And it would be a really shaking thing, I think, for a lot of people. I assume there would be a lot of people who would be very excited about this. There are people who believe this is happening already. So I would probably feel very validated. This would probably be very excited, but there would probably be maybe even more people potentially who would be pretty scared by the possibility of extraterrestrials actually visiting us.
Well, I think as well, like when you just look at like how people act in society, like if we can't even just come to an agreement that like trans rights are fine, can you imagine how someone would react to something as intelligent as them but maybe not human, or something not human telling them that they're not intelligent?
Or even, because of their technological position, even being in some sort of like humanity being somewhat subservient or potentially losing sovereignty to a spacefaring race that we just don't have a choice, being subjects in some sort of a galactic empire run by hyper intelligent ETs. I mean, we might not be able to do anything about it. It just might be like, well, they're going to impose this on us.
Yeah, we've never been the losers.
Yeah, human always wins.
I think that's an interesting like point though too, because I've often thought about this, like how would we ever even communicate with something like that? I know in a lot of like ET sightings and experiences, people claim that it's telepathy, and maybe it is. Maybe evolution's final goal is like pure consciousness, and it's about getting from here to there, and the longer something lives, the more conscious it becomes until it is conscious. But the one thing that I find quite interesting is like how would you communicate that? Do you know what I mean? Like we can't communicate to like animals on planet Earth, say for instance, like we can't explain to a whale why it's swimming through a sea that's full of oil and trash. It just has to see that. And like if we could explain to a whale, like would we? And I see that similar kind of thing with like the whole alien thing, because for one, how would we communicate with them? Because if it's two different languages, how do you even come to an understanding of what that in that language means this in this language? Because there's no communication. They might have come from a planet that doesn't even have trees or like the same kind of things that we would say. So like alphabets and words and everything don't really make sense. So then it would probably fall back down to like consciousness and like what your intention was. But then even then, like how is that a thing? And if they can do it, could you make the argument that in time we'd be able to do it? Because that's quite weird too, like growing up with like sci-fi films and seeing stuff, like about like the occult and witchcraft and all this kind of stuff. Like, does that mean that elements of that is true, or in our future we might have that? Or did humans back in the day when there was less focus on materialistic stuff, were there more like pseudoscience phenomenons happening? Because that's another thing that interests me too about like sightings, is where how, say, if some, which I think we'll be talking about in a little bit with the Phoenix Lights, but how the same thing can happen in an area but multiple people see different things.
Very true.
Because that makes me think, like, are they just showing up consciously? Like, is nothing actually in physical reality and they're just allowing you to see it in whatever way you could comprehend it? Because if you like look through history too with like ancient alien stuff, whether or not you guys believe in that kind of stuff, I think you've watched a couple of things on ancient aliens on your Patreon show, but that whole idea of like when people back in the day would do drawings and it would be like a chariot of fire or a dragon or something, you do sit there and think, well, maybe they were just doing that because that's what the people of the day could comprehend. So like, because chariots were back then, oh, well, if there's a chariot in the sky, a human could comprehend that. And then in the 50s, when we were getting into like all of our sci-fi and our comic books and Martians and stuff and drawing like discs, I wonder if there's something in that. Because I know I'm going on a little bit of a rant now. I've just been thinking about it a lot.
It's great stuff. We're listening intently.
But because this is another thing too, like everybody always says that maybe the one true language of the universe is math, because you can kind of explain everything that way. And that I've been thinking about that a lot recently with like crop circles too. And if you guys haven't done an episode on crop circles, you should definitely do an episode on crop circles.
Live
suggestion.
Because that's another interesting one. Because I was chatting about this to my partner today. I drive her crazy all the time talking about random shit when we're on walks. But I was saying to her today, I was like, what if crop circles are just QR codes? and like they just come here, they scan the planet, like, oh, it's a mammal, they do this, and they leave a QR code. So if anybody else comes along, they know what's here. They don't have to like do the thing.
That's so funny. I love that too.
Yeah,
because it just makes us look like idiots.
Yeah.
I think what you're touching at, and you're hitting at this, Jacob, is you're kind of delving into some of this sort of the consciousness side, or the like, they say like, oh, that like the third eye, like the awakening, like, that kind of thing, where simulation theory is a big one too, right?
Yeah. Like just
you're touching in on this part of this whole genre.
Yeah.
It's very fascinating.
It is. And I find it unusual because I can't imagine many people sit there and think about it, but I find it fascinating, just reality in general, just like, and no one ever questions it. Do you know what I mean? Like we have like no, like we're like a species that has like amnesia almost of our history. Like we're not entirely sure what happened, but we're here, and there's some relics from back in the day, and then there's just like reality, and like, what is the purpose of it? Like, is there any purpose to me even thinking that there's purpose? Is there any purpose in me having this moment thinking about it? Do you know what I mean? It just keeps going. And if you keep zooming in, like you guys have discussed in your holofractal episode, I think you did anyway. Like if you zoom in, it's the same. And if you zoom out, it's the same. Everything's like fractal. And maybe whatever like plane of existence you're on, that's all you can kind of experience. But then even then, we know that's not true, because there's different stuff going on at like the microbial level than there is here, for instance. And if they can both happen at the same time, and also there's planets that neither can fully comprehend, then what does that mean? And what is the purpose in that? And like, we have to invent technology, for instance, to like look out at the stars and out into space, where we get all these fantastic like photos of nebulas and stuff, but you can't see that with the naked eye. So like, you could almost make an argument that somebody or something, if you're going down that simulation theory route, that it was pre-coded as a possibility for that technology to be created so that something could observe it. Otherwise, how did it happen?
Yeah.
And that's kind of weird in itself. And like, I just feel that the whole like UFO phenomena could be almost like a game cheat code. You could have like keys to the back door. Do you know what I mean? Like unlock everything.
Truman Show style. Yeah. Like it's that Truman Show argument where what if your entire reality was just fabricated, and you really only need to process the things that are happening in your, like, how do you know, wherever Jacob is in the UK, that 1,000 miles away on the other side of the planet, that the things that are happening are actually happening. Like you can't perceive, you have no perception of it. You can't be in both those places at one time. So how do you know it's actually happening? How do I know that the blue of the sky that you see is the same blue that I see, or that we don't know? I have no idea. I have no idea if you're a real person or not, or if this is all some sort of illusion, fabricated thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also another interesting thing. And to like, when all these people have experiences and they talk about this whole like telepathy thing, because that kind of seems like the only way that it would make sense. Do you know what I mean? Like if you did have to go and commute to multiple species, if you could just send them like directly your intention, then it kind of just solves all barriers. Do you know what I mean? And imagine a society like that where you can't lie or you can't hide your secrets. Like you wouldn't have world leaders that would come up and be like, oh yeah, we're going to do this kind of thing, and know that their pockets have been bought or something, because everybody would instantly...
Ricky Gervais movie.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, basically. And like, I wonder if that's another thing too. Like, I wonder if, I wonder how far the whole consciousness thing goes, because it might just be like a human thing as well. Because like we sit here and think about like afterlife and make up religion and all that kind of stuff. Well, we don't make up. It might be true. Who knows? But there's like so much. And like when you look at like a wasp or a cat, for instance, or a bee or anything, like does their consciousness kind of go somewhere too? Are they contemplating the universe? And like,
my cat likes to sit on his little perch and watch the window outside. Does he have any idea that he lives in like a little house and he's just watching the world outside. And sometimes I always look at him and I say, man, I wonder what's going through your head.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do the fish in the sea even know they're on a planet in space? Because they can't like see the stars. Do you know what I mean? They have no idea apart from the ocean that they're in. But it all exists outside of their own comprehension. So, like, the same argument could almost be made about us. But then that is quite terrifying as like a thought experiment, because then you just think like, what is everything? Do you know what I mean? And that's quite scary. For a lot of people.
Sometimes it's good to go back and read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or something and just kind of have a laugh about it. That it's all just 42.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, why is that? It's just that's the number, and you got to have a towel. And dolphins were actually like the most intelligent species on the planet, but they just sort of hid it from us, So
yeah, it is very interesting. But so yeah, for this episode, we thought, well, we've been talking back and forth, hadn't we? And we thought it might be quite cool to touch up a little bit on the Phoenix Lights, because that's quite a big UFO sighting / incident over in America. I'd probably say it's the biggest aside from Roswell for like credibility and the amount of people that have seen it and stuff. So before we kind of start talking about it, what are like your guys' initial like thoughts? Because I know you've done an episode extensively talking about this, haven't you?
Yeah, we covered this on one of our episodes of Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time, and our opinions of it, we felt like, so there's a few distinct things which I know we're going to talk about that happened that are all part of this Phoenix Lights collection. There's one big night, there's a couple of other events in years after that, but the big night of the Phoenix Lights, there's two events, and people saw this first event happen. Lots of people started to come outside and look at the sky, and then a lot of people saw this second event happen. And for us, the second event, not so compelling,
right?
But the first event, we really felt like there was something in the sky. I think we both leaned more toward it being some sort of a U.S. military project that, was maybe not supposed to be seen, some kind of like a lighter than aircraft that was floating over the state of Arizona that night. But it seems like there was something. Like there was no other good explanation that really made sense in the context of everything.
Yeah, I find this whole case really interesting, because I wasn't actually aware that there was sightings that spanned over like the case of a couple of weeks. I thought whenever I'd heard of like the Phoenix Lights, I only really knew about that V-shaped kind of like iconic thing that everybody talks about with like the footage of the lights flying in like a formation. But when I was doing a bit of research on it, it is really interesting, because it's like you're saying, you have the one I think happens at, is it 8 p.m.?
Yeah, something like that. It's a little bit earlier in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it has less lights as well, doesn't it? It has 6, I think, and then there's one later on in the evening that it has 9. Oh, I'm not sure. I saw something anyway on BuzzFeed, and I found it interesting because I'm kind of on the same wavelength as you guys. I think it probably is like secret military. The only thing that would make me argue against that is that it just seems really counterproductive for the military to not tell themselves about them doing a secret operation. Because
well, that's where I think the differences in where we both live maybe come into play, because I don't know.
Yeah, I think the real thing with the U.S. military is that, depending on who's conducting the operation, some of this stuff is so top level and secret. It's like they do it with the intention that they don't want other people to know it. Yeah. And so they conduct these test flights and they do these things, and it's like only a small part of people are supposed to know about it. And then, if anybody else, they call the local Air Force base and they say, "Are you running a test?" And they go, "No." And it's like, well, then actually, because it wasn't actually that base that's running the test, it's some secret facility or whatever, a different location, and it just happens to be in that area. Because, the thing that initiated the whole Phoenix Lights episode, there was sightings in Nevada, which was a little bit before 8 o'clock that evening. And that
And for listeners who aren't from America, those states neighbor each other.
Yeah, they have
very close.
they share a border. And so this thing comes out from Nevada, and Nevada is like known for having, that's where Area 51 is.
Right.
You got the Groom Lake facility.
Las Vegas,
Reno, beautiful, beautiful desert state. And it's home to like secret facilities and stuff. There's lots of space where there's not a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And so
a lot of the nuclear testing goes out there in the middle of the desert.
I was going to say, when I was a little bit younger, I actually visited Roswell with my dad, and we went to like White Sands Missile Range and everything. Because my dad's a massive UFO nut; he's obsessed with them. It's probably where I get it from.
That's very cool. Well, then it's like you get out into the desert, and they just even around Phoenix, they have that huge test range, range, and it's just acres and acres and acres of desert land where they run all kinds of, they test bombs and stuff out there. And it's just far enough away from people that, nobody's really in danger of anything happening. And they can just do this all day long. And, they fly in aircraft from other parts of the country and test out there. And Nevada's kind of the same way, where it's just a lot of open space and there's room for these secret facilities. So, to me, at least, it kind of makes logical sense that, hey, he started somewhere in Nevada, took off.
Yeah.
They didn't tell the Air Force bases in Arizona that, hey, this thing's going to be flying through your area because this is maybe some like top secret craft. They don't want only a limited number of people to know because they don't want it to spread around or whatever.
For me, something I noticed when I was kind of researching the topic and getting ready to talk about it again was how kind of I'm talking specifically about the events in 97, which is kind of the first,
the inaugural
Phoenix Lights events, the ones that I think convinced Andy and I that there was something in the sky that night. We're less convinced by the early 2000s sightings, but was how aggressive people were in denying that anything happened at all. After the 97 events.
Mm-hmm.
You had kind of the governor of Arizona at the time. You had like the different city council members. You had kind of the military kind of all being like, no, nothing happened at all. And like not denying it so hard. It's like, that it makes you think like, oh, you're compensating for the fact that something clearly happened and you don't want us to know about it.
Yeah. No, that whole thing's really interesting. I'm reading a book at the moment from a guy called Ross Coulthart called In Plain Sight. And his whole book is just talking about all of the different like UFO sightings, experiences, encounters, ones with the Air Force, ones with like branches of government around the world and all this kind of stuff. And he talks about how like it is really weird how when civilian things happen or like sightings take place, the government will always like come out and be like, no, like it did not happen. There was nothing there. Or they'll backtrack on a story that also failed. Like if they come out and say it was weather balloons or flares, because didn't they try to recreate the Phoenix Lights with a flare expedition, didn't they, or something?
Yeah. And that's part of the thing with this is that the earlier satellites, this triangular formation of lights that flew basically all the way across Arizona from the northwest to the southeast. This is the one that's really convincing to us. Then that got people outside because there was a buzz about this thing hovering over the entire state of Arizona. So people come outside, they start looking. People in the Phoenix area then saw other lights that were in the direction of the Goldwater Range. And what the U.S. Air Force has said is the explanation for everything that happened that night is that they were doing flare drops, testing flare drops. And I find it pretty compelling for the second set that, probably the Air Force is being truthful here. Like, this seems like a flare drop. And when you watch the video footage and stuff, it doesn't seem like it seems like flares to me. Maybe I just have no sense of imagination, no sense of wonder. I'm a jaded cynic and everybody hates me because I find no joy in anything anymore, but it seemed like flares to me. And I feel like with the government's official explanation, quote unquote, was really like, it was just flares. And then that's the end of it, but it doesn't, flares could explain the second satellites.
Yeah.
I can't see that flares would stay aloft and travel across the entire state 300 miles and nobody would be in formation for 300 miles.
Right.
Because you can even see in the video for the second set of lights, it's not a super tight formation like you see. I mean, I know the footage for the first sighting is really bad, but it's more of a tight formation. Like it looks stable. It looks solid.
There's so many, like an entire city saw something.
Yeah.
And like, we're like, something's up there, like going on up there, right? Like everybody is seeing this stuff. Like, it's not just like a lot of times in some UFO cases, you'll get like, not to, pick on a UK case, but we covered Rendlesham, which is a very famous UFO case in the UK, considered the UK's Roswell.
Yeah.
But you only have a few people who saw that, right? Like maybe 3 or 4. But in this case, you have literally like hundreds. You have hundreds of people, tons of people calling in. There is variance in what they are saying they saw. But in general, like if you were to maybe graph it out, do it like you said, math, the universal language, I think what you would find is there's probably a higher probability that the amount of the standard deviation in what people saw was not significant enough to make us kind of disprove this hypothesis that there was something in the sky that night.
I wonder if it would say if it happened tonight, would we have got any more answers just because of like Twitter and the internet? Because obviously none of this was around in 97. So, but it's still the fact that it like caught fire, you know what I mean? The media were talking about it and everybody in Arizona was talking about it. It kind of just gives more testament to the idea that something definitely did happen. Because if there was no like social media to spread it like wildfire, but everybody in Arizona was talking about it, and a couple of months or weeks later, whenever it got picked up by like national press, that in a sense shows you, you know what I mean? And I wonder if, say like Twitter or Instagram did exist, if multiple people had have filmed it or were just tweeting like what's going on in the sky.
Yeah.
If we would have like found out more.
Yeah, I totally agree with that proposition, Jacob, that I mean, I think that if this happened today, people would have been outside with their phones, they would have been recording this, because at the time, I mean 1997, you've got like a camcorder, if you're going to record this, but it's not like not everybody had a camcorder in the late 90s. And so, the footage that people did get of it is very bad. Whereas today, everybody's got a nice camera in their pocket, basically. And so I think there would be a lot more video evidence for it, which is probably the one thing that's kind of a gap in this story, which I think helps take away maybe some of the credibility of it being an actual craft initially, is because there's just not a lot of documented footage of it. People can't see it. And I think for a lot of times, I mean, for me especially, seeing is believing in a lot of ways. And, you can see that second set of lights, but the first set is not as well documented. And I think if this happened today, there would be buzz. People would be out there with their cameras. They would be videoing this, and it would probably answer a lot more questions, or who knows, maybe raise more questions.
It kind of happened when the Department of Defense finally released that one video. Remember that happened like, I don't know, maybe like last year?
Yeah, with the gimbal thing with the little TikTok.
Yeah, and it was like, we don't know what this is. Yeah, like it's something flying around. And I think, nowadays though, to play as devil's advocate here is like, we have After Effects, we have Photoshop, we have things like video editing software, and it's like sometimes you might have to wonder if people are gonna come out and kind of say things like, "Oh, well, that's just edited." Like, stuff's pretty good nowadays, and you can make some convincing footage. But I think the sheer amount, I think you're right. The sheer amount, like if an entire city of people saw something and they were all filming it, like, really, like there's a 1,000 really nicely edited videos? I don't think so.
And you'd get it from all different angles. It would be a lot harder for a crappy explanation for that to stick, which I think that flares as an explanation for that is a pretty crappy explanation. And it's kind of stuck as the official explanation just because I don't think there's a whole lot that you could say that refutes it necessarily. You can't come back with enough solid proof to say it wasn't flares. Right?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. You talking about just loads of people filming it. Have you guys ever heard of those? I think they're called sky hubs.
Not familiar.
Cool. Well, they're basically there's this guy that's come up with this idea that it's kind of like a webcam, but almost on a mount, and you attach it to your roof. I think they're just in America at the moment, but you like attach it to your roof and it monitors the sky through an app. And basically, if one of them catches like an unidentified object flying through the sky, it checks in with all the satellites and everything that are flying around in orbit, so it'll tell you if it is an anomaly or not. But when it does, it alerts you to look outside, and it also I don't know why I'm repeating myself. It sends out a notification to all of the other sky hubs too. So if you live like 3 miles down the road and you also have one, you'll get a notification saying, 3 miles away, somebody noticed this flying east, it's coming in your direction. And he's trying to build a database or a way for multiple people to have sightings if they do occur. And like something like that, if this had been around for the Phoenix lights, would have been a game changer. Because this is what I find also interesting about the Phoenix lights, is you could also make the argument that it probably was human, because that definitely wouldn't happen now, because they are aware that everybody has a smartphone, and they probably wouldn't want to fly something over a city if it was top secret.
No, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't heard of Skyhub, but that's a pretty cool idea, to kind of create a network of eyes watching for unexplained phenomena in the sky. That's pretty cool.
I think it helps, doesn't it? Because
right.
As well, it probably stops you sounding like the crazy guy if you think you saw something too, and you can debunk yourself, because that's another thing for me. I've never had an experience or had a sighting. I'd love to. Like, all I want to do is believe. I want to see the saucer. I maybe you don't want to get abducted, because that might be a bit too scary. But like,
I do. I want to get probed.
But like, it would be super cool. But at the same time, I do often think, like, I don't know if I want to see something like that, because like, it's like you're saying, seeing is believing, and
right,
it has stigma around it, and it'd be quite difficult, because you'd have to gauge who you were going to talk to about it, because they might think you're crazy. You might think you're crazy, and it could probably mess with a lot of like your self beliefs and questioning quite a lot of things. So I often think to myself, like, maybe I shouldn't see. But I do agree. I think that whole like that there should be some form of like initiative or some idea where we can kind of allow the public to do a little bit more research with it, because it always seems to be either the military or government operating it, or it just has stigma around it because it's weirdos with tinfoiled hats or like little green men. Right. And I do think that if there is something there, which it sounds like the data is, it would be cool to allow people to like try and contribute in their way, because things like that solve these things. Do you know what I mean? If there is a sighting, that thing can instantly tell them, it's this satellite, don't worry about it. And they don't look like a fool posting online that they've just seen something and everybody needs to go outside. So I don't know, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that, I mean, I know in like terms of UAPs, the government's usually the adversary of people, right? You know, that's sort of how it's set up, is that the government's trying to keep this under wraps and people are seeing things. And that's like the big conspiracy with it. But to me, it almost would make sense that the government would want to leverage stuff that people are doing or seeing to investigate, because this is kind of what happened in Phoenix. You know, one of the city council people, Francis Barwood, brought up at a meeting.
Very reasonable question.
Yeah, very reasonable question. Say, are we going to investigate this? And, you know, she got labeled as being like a UFO nut, and, you know, like that she was out of her mind because she asked this question. And her real concern was that, hey, something happened in the skies. Are people safe? Is this a thing that we should be worried about? Very reasonable question.
Even if it was flares, it's like, should we be concerned that there's flares?
Right.
What should people do if they find a flare in their backyard? Like,
right. I mean, as a city council person, this is all reasonable stuff. And I mean, you know, to me, it's like the government just shut it down. You know, like, you know, Fife Symington, the governor, he said, well, we called the Air Force and they wouldn't investigate, and so we just dropped it. And it's like, well, okay, but that's kind of a bad answer. Like, don't you want some real concrete answers on what happened? But I would think the government would rather be able to explain these things away. But I also can understand that if they come up against something that they really don't understand, it's hard for them to admit that something happened and we don't know what it is, and we maybe aren't able to do anything about it.
Well, it's almost like dealing with, like a customer who's complaining at a establishment or whatever. You just have to be like, take a hard stance and just be like, no, nothing happened. No, nothing happened. They keep saying like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And you just say, nope. The answer is no, deny. And then it's like, well, or just, and aggressively kind of squash it like it seemed like they did. It seems like maybe that's why I think we lean towards, oh, okay, this was some kind of, experimental plane or spy plane or like whatever, because it's like, there's so much classified info. It's just like somebody high up told the governor, listen, it's none of your concern. Squash it. Like, do it. And he was like, all right, well, I got to do it. So what do? You go on the attack. Make cartoons of that city council person and like,
Yeah. And I mean, our government here in the US has a long history of, operating black projects, secret covert things that are unknown to the public, that are kind of off the books, so to speak. Like the stealth bomber was a big one that they tested it for like 2 decades, like 20 years, and it was flying operational. Nobody knew about it. It wasn't public information until it had already been in service for a while.
Yeah.
So, it's just like, it's one of those things that people said, well, we think this exists, but nobody ever had proof. But it's, presumably people were having sightings of this thing flying around when they were testing it and all this stuff. It's active aircraft that's in operation. So it seems really possible to me that the government had something that was operational and just squashes it. Like, oh, we don't want you to know about it.
It's
kind of
it's quite bad, really, is it, for America? Because they kind of found themselves in a bit of an awkward situation, because it was like, either A, you come out and you go, it's a foreign adversary that is flying over our airspace, and we had no idea that they did it, but they did, and we couldn't stop them. Or they go, yes, you caught us red-handed doing a secret test on something we didn't want anybody to know about. But thank you, media, for telling all of our foreign adversaries about our technology. Or 3, it's alien and they're not in communication with it, or they don't really understand what it is, and it's showing up in their airspace, and they can't admit to the country that they can't defend the country.
Right.
Yep. And that's why it's clear that, it's the easiest answer out of those 3 you proposed is just say no, nothing happened.
Yeah.
You saw nothing. And and they know that people will forget about it eventually. And the only people talking about it are years later people who do podcasts.
Well,
so
that's another interesting thing though too, because like this is probably another thing that is probably a little bit unfair on like Western culture and society, is like, because of free speech and ideas, like we kind of are allowed to hammer onto our government. Like, you wouldn't even be able to think or ask this question in China or Russia, because it's just simply not allowed. And I think that's another thing to think about too, with like, we're allowed to kind of give the government a bit of stick if they're not doing their job properly, or we're allowed to say what we're thinking, because that's kind of the whole of what Western culture is built on. And I think that's also caught them in a tricky situation, because other countries don't have to disclose anything to their like people, but we somehow feel like we have a right to know things. And I don't know if that's just because of like 100 years of us having free speech has led to us thinking that we're entitled to know the answers to the universe, and if these people can't tell us, someone will. But I find that quite interesting too, because it is like you're saying, the American government will take the same approach as China or Russia or any other government and just go, no, it wasn't. But we've also like come out and they've gone, oh, but there is something and we don't know what it is. Like, they're still acknowledging it. And I think that's quite interesting, because there's like 2 different things coming from that. Like, how can you throughout history say, no, it wasn't, and then now be like, oh, this is? I find that.
Yeah, there's like, I think there's 2 different, you can either have like an Orwellian look at Big Brother, that kind of concept, or you can kind of also have I guess you would call it like maybe a Huxleyan, like a Brave New World kind of outlook where
Wow, my God, you sound so well read.
I know.
All these different authors.
You know
brought
what?
up.
It's just, clear head here and it's a bright sunny day here in the bunker, but no, you can have those kind of two different looks, right? You can kind of say, like, a lot of people might say, like, oh, well, it's Big Brother and they just are gonna tell you no, but at the same time, maybe it's a little bit more like Brave New World, where it's like, you know what? I'm going to give you so many options. You're going to get distracted. You're not going to know where the truth is.
Yeah.
You're not going to know what to look. You're not going to care anymore. It's like, yeah, okay, this thing happened, but you know what? Life goes on. You got bills to pay. You got mouths to feed. You ain't nothing in this world for free.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cage the elephant.
Wow. Jeez.
No, it's kind of that concept where it's like maybe it's less of them just flat out denying and more of them playing into this, like, well, you know what, they're going to get distracted from the truth and they'll just forget about it.
Yeah.
In
I
a
think
week.
I think that's the same though with like all high strangeness and like bizarre
Mhm.
conspiracy like topics anyway, because it's kind of the same with like simulation theory. Like you could sit there all day and think that it's a simulation and you're a sim, but at the end of the day, like that's still your existence, even if you are just a sim and you have a crappy job working at a Starbucks. Like that is your existence, and no matter what you're going to do, that's it. So you might as well just carry on living out your existence instead of hating yourself for it. And you could see that with almost everything. Do you know what I mean? Like it can go when all these kind of like bizarre topics, like it can just keep going, and it can just get to the point where it either is outlandish or there is some kind of like research element to it that somebody can do. One thing I will say that is kind of cool, since America has come out and done this report, is there does seem to be like a lot more like big speakers in America that are like willing to talk about like the subject a little bit more. Like I've seen, I can never get his name right. I always get them confused. I think it's Eric Weinstein, but there's like a few people out there now, and like Sam Harris and all those kinds of big people.
Yeah.
And like, you've seen, I know Neil deGrasse Tyson's still fighting it, but I think he's got a bit of a ego problem more than anything. But sorry if anybody's listening as well that likes Neil deGrasse Tyson.
People have interests. Some people out in the media have interests that isn't always, maybe they're playing like a character, or they just fall into that thing. And, he knows that part of his shtick is debunking and proving everything wrong, even if it's not fun.
Yeah, I just love that he has a master class course on teaching people how to think, but then he tells you don't think about this subject because it's bogus. That would be my only contribution to that little bit. But yeah, I find it interesting because I think it has so many like levels to it. Do you know what I mean? It can just go so many ways. And as we were saying, I like to start with, it doesn't even matter if it is true, if it isn't true. Like you still have bills to pay, you still have your job, you still have your family, you still have your life. And I wonder like what that'll mean going forward. Like, will all of these kind of traditions change if these things become true, or will we just kind of stay being human because that's just what we do? Because like you could also make an argument that if there is an intelligent being somewhere in the universe, they've managed to travel here, you could probably argue that their way of life would be a lot more utopian than ours, or would probably be a better way of life than ours. They probably don't have famine, or they've probably fixed the weather or whatever it is because they can travel here. And you'd suddenly get 8 billion humans that would go, right, we're going to migrate from Earth because it sucks here. Like we want to go there where there's infinite beer or infinite television. You know what I mean? Like something ridiculous. But
right,
you could also make an argument that maybe like if you were going to put the foil hat on and say governments of the world do know about extraterrestrials and they are in contact with them, maybe they wouldn't want people to know about them because this is the best we've got right now. So everybody kind of just puts up and shuts up because we can't get off this planet. So we might as well just live out our existence on it. But if we could, what would that mean to the planet? Like, would we be even more reckless because we'd be like, oh, just go find another one? Or would we just not want to be here anymore, which would kind of render the powers that are at B right now not have the power that they have anymore? Because this is another thing too, because I know in the future you guys are probably going to do an episode on like secret space programs, because I love that as a topic, but also part of me thinks if they did have like interstellar, like if the US government did have interstellar vehicles, why waste billions of dollars taxpayer money on a NASA program that takes 50 years to like since we've gone from the moon and not really gone anywhere else? It'd be like, if you do have those secret things and you are using them, why to the public fund something that takes like decades? And it would also kind of render all science on the planet kind of like not, well, pointless almost, because there would be like a new form of science. Do you know what I mean?
No, 100%. And you're right. I mean, it's like, oh man, I don't really want to, well, I'll say this. It's like, imagine if we somehow discovered wormholes, like we found out, oh, wormholes are real, and we could travel to anywhere in the galaxy and stuff, and we could find a planet that had unlimited resources or something, like just an unbelievable amount of resources that you could tap into. You know, I think there would be a strong argument for just being like, oh, let's get the heck off this rock. Let's just go over there. Why are we wasting all of our time and effort trying to fix this thing that we've muddied up completely and ruined? Let's just all, it's like the Patrick meme from SpongeBob. It's like, what if we take the Earth and we just move it over there? You know, it's like, let's just go over there. Like, start fresh.
Yeah, and I do have to think that if we are capable of interplanetary travel at some point in the future, or even today, that people would be they would just ruin another planet and then we would just move on. I do think that.
What if you had infinite planets?
Yeah, that's the thing. If you get access, you could just keep going to another planet. I think most humans would be like, well, no reason to take care of this one. Yeah, I think that's the way humans are.
Yeah, dude, totally. But that's another thing that kind of scares me, because like from what we've seen, like reality, even if the universe is infinite, I don't actually know if we know. So if there are any scientists listening that like, actually a paper was published yesterday and we found out that it's not, you can attack me in the comments. But I don't actually think we know whether or not the universe is infinite or finite yet. But one thing we do know is everything in the universe has a lifespan, right? So like stars will form and die and planets will form and die. So that's quite scary, because even if we can survive for that long, eventually there'll be nothing to survive on, right? And that's quite a bleak future for humanity, because like even if we figure out interplanetary travel, great, we can go to Mars, we can go to Venus, we can go to like the moons of Saturn, Jupiter, and all those kind of places. But if we can't figure out interstellar travel, our sun's going to blow up in like 4 billion years, and that'll be the end of us, even if we colonize the solar system. So we'll have to figure out how to go and find other stars. And then once we've gone and found other stars, it'll be like, well, all stars are going to go. So now we need to go and orbit black holes or what other crazy ideas they want to come up with. But eventually there won't be anything, because it will all deteriorate into nothing. So if we survive that long, like what's left? Or if we do like what you're saying, like we did invent wormholes or something, and we carry on with that recklessness idea of, well, we could just have what we want, we will eventually like fully run out. And can you imagine how devastating that would be if like humanity colonized the universe and then like trillions of people all just had to die because we ran out of everything?
That sounds very human. Wow. Actually, I mean, that sounds human to me. I mean, I think what we should do as humanity, as the human race, we should.
I think Jacob's been listening to some Smiths or something lately. I don't know. I mean, geez Louise.
Getting down. I got my emo fringe back.
There you go.
I think what we should do is we should get the ability to travel between the stars, and we should just start partying on every planet, use it until we lose it, move on to the next one until the universe snaps back and we all go out in freaking blaze of glory, baby. Woo!
Just be known as the party universe.
We would be known as the virus. Woo! That's what other civilizations
the human virus.
Yeah.
Watch out, Grays. Yeah. We're coming party down.
Oh, you don't want to go to you want to go to Zeta Reticuli too, because that place has humans.
Yeah.
The cockroaches of the universe.
Yes, that's what we would be.
They'd be crazy. But it is weird, and like I love these kind of conversations because I just like thinking about how ridiculous or how crazy everything gets. And we've probably rambled on a little bit from what we were talking about, but it doesn't matter because it's fun. But yeah, it's just interesting. But I am curious. Have either of you ever had like a weird sighting or experience, or have you ever had like anything paranormal or just like deja vu or anything kind of like that happen to you that's within high strangeness?
I've never had a paranormal experience. I've never seen any strange lights in the sky or been visited by any sort of entities or creatures. I've also never had fun, and I've never enjoyed any moment of life to any extent.
Much like most humans, most aliens want nothing to do with you.
Right.
And ghosts.
Yeah. Paranormal phenomenon, extraterrestrial beings, they all stay away from me because I'm very unpleasant.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I'm in the same boat as Andy. I'm very unlikable. And, I do have deja vu a lot. I will say that. I get it, pretty frequently, but and it feels weird. It's a very weird. I have a lot of out of body experiences. So I don't know what that kind of says about consciousness. We haven't really delved that hard into that side of consciousness, like that sort of out of body experience, or like that. You ever have like those moments that like early in the morning, you just made like your morning cup of tea or cup of coffee or whatever, and it's like you're just like, whoa, dude, like everything is real.
Yeah. No, I
have those, and then like you like feel like you're like, wait, like is everything that's happening like actually happening? Like, am I actually inside my body thinking and like talking, and like all the things that happened to me yesterday were real, and like that stuff it's actually happening to me. These like, I went and maybe I put my ticket in the turnstile and I got onto the train and on the train, and then the train moves, and then like there's thousands and thousands of people, and somebody coded that train ticketing system. Somebody made the train ticket and the turnstile, and like somebody worked in a factory and made all that stuff, and the train itself is made and it's conducted by somebody, and there's millions of other people around me at all the time.
Yeah, I get that. No, I get that 100%. I also kind of get it sometimes where like weird things will happen, where like you'll be thinking, like you might have something on your mind that week, and that thing might happen a little bit more. I know that can maybe just be like because it's on your mind, you might be seeing it, for instance.
Right.
But like for instance, I found like I might be like really weird one. So my nan recently passed. But before she passed, really unusually, like it was sudden, like it wasn't expected, it was completely random. But that entire day before she passed, I spent the whole day watching documentaries on the afterlife because I was just interested in it that day.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And like for that evening to roll around, and then for me to get that phone call, like I was quite mentally ready to comprehend it because it was the only thing I'd been watching all day. And I occasionally get like little things like that which will be a little bit weird, or like another little fun one for me was I kept joking about last year when I was with my partner, when we were out, I kept joking about like people like sneezing around me and stuff when we were in public, like just before the pandemic. I was a bit like, I don't like it when people like cough in my direction and stuff in shops. I'm just not a fan. And I like jokingly went to for like that whole week when we were like out, because we were like down in London, I kept saying like, oh, you watch this time next year, everybody will be in masks. I can't tell you why, but I just hope it happens because it would make my life easier. And literally like the following year we're in a pandemic. Now I know, apologies.
Thanks a lot, Jacob.
You got your wish, Jacob.
Yeah, apologies world if I just brought that on everyone, but it's probably complete coincidence. But I've had a few things in my life like that where I'll suddenly gain a massive interest in something, and then it'll like become super relevant in my life. And I've always found that quite interesting, but I wouldn't say it's like weird or like pseudoscience or I'm tapping into something, but I'm just wary of it. And I like to ask all my guests when they come on their show if they've ever had like any moment like deja vu or anything like that. Because another one a lot of people like to talk about is dreams, isn't it? I find dreams quite fascinating because it's like either you are physically going somewhere else or your brain's creating that entire reality. But if that is true, like what does that mean for when you're in reality? Like whose brain created this reality for you to experience it? If you're just living in this one and then you're making one when you go to sleep, or are you just going to a different one when you sleep? You know what I mean? It's all really, really weird, and it starts getting a little bit trippy. And I can probably imagine when I'm in my 50s, I'll go down like a what's it called route? What's the name of the guy? And I'll just be like some old man taking loads of psychedelics in the Amazon, being like, "Oh, believe me, I've been to the other side and seen the clockwork elves or whatever they're called."
Jacob, you mentioned dreams. I got to tell you about
The Cranberries?
some dreams. Yeah, let me tell you all about the Cranberries, my favorite Irish band. No, I had a series of dreams, not like they were connected to each other necessarily, but this was kind of a theme in dreams for me for a little while. Is where have you ever had like a naughty dream?
Yeah.
Like a sexual dream?
Yeah.
So I was having these dreams that were, there was some where it's like in the beginning of the dream, there was like sort of some sexual tension between me and another person in the dream.
If this was me, I swear to God.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying who it was, but it could be somebody who's in the room with me. And before there would be any consummation of those feelings, things would start to advance, and the other person in the dream would make it clear that they were willing.
Yeah.
I would be like, I can't, I'm married, or I have to go. And that would be the end of the dream. So this is the kind of reality that my brain constructs for me. One of, totally finite possibility, where there's no magic at all.
Yeah, you could live in a dreamscape in your mind where you can imagine any kind of fantasy or and anything, and you do the most boring thing imaginable.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. I'm sorry. I have a wife, and also I'm late for the bus. Ta-ta.
In one of these dreams, there was a giant monster attacking Chicago. It was like a Godzilla type of thing. Everybody was going to die, and everybody knew it. I was like, I really should get home.
Yeah, that's the real reason why you left.
And so for some reason the buses were still running, so I did actually ride a bus back to my apartment.
So what really then is there a UFO story or case that is your favorite then, or would you say Phoenix Lights is probably up there? Because you guys have covered loads, can I just say?
Yeah, Phoenix Lights is a good one, but I think I'm going to speak for both of us when I say this, that our favorite UFO topic that we've covered is the Tehran UFO incident from I think it was 1978, in the 70s.
Late 70s.
There was this UFO spotted in the skies over Iran. They scrambled jets to go find it, and the pilots had like an encounter with something in the sky, and then it just disappeared. And it's been described as like this like brightly colored disc, like changing colors and things.
Shape. It changes colors and shape, and like it's very amorphous.
Very cool sounding. And the thing that really sold us on that, we were both convinced there had to be something there, and the skeptical explanation for it was really unconvincing because it involved this complicated sort of Rube Goldberg's type of machine of the planets being in a specific, like Jupiter being in a specific position in the sky along with Saturn, and people interpreting that while at the same time another airplane was flying right across where those two planets were and dropped a flare, and then that's all what
and there was like
saw.
A comet at the same
and
time.
It's like, this is so convoluted, it's hard to like even explain the explanation because it's so complicated.
You had a lot of high up people in that, like in the Iranian military, who still to this day are like, we saw something. And then you also have a ton of civilians who saw something. So there's a lot of, it's not just one or two people. There's a lot of people who can confirm that something up there happened. And it's a very kind of bizarre scenario. There's a few other little pieces of skepticism, like when the jet planes were up there. I guess that's not really skeptics' take, but it's hard to know because it did happen a little while ago. And but when the jets were up there communicating with this thing, their communication panels, their electronics, their like missile guidance systems all like crashed and just like totally shut off. And it was like these it's like, okay, well, the planes were old and they weren't serviced that well, but like this was kind of before Iran and the U.S. were enemy. This was still at a time when they were
before the revolution,
right? They were allies, and so these were American planes that they were flying, American South planes, a little outdated, but still American planes, and so not that they can't go bad, but it's like, you can't blame it on like, oh well, these were just crappy old ships or something. Like, no, this was like decent tech, and it was. The comm channels would totally cut out, and it happened multiple times. So something was up there.
Yeah, and then stuff comes back online once they get out of range of the craft that they encountered, or whatever they encountered. I don't know that it was a craft necessarily, but the object that they encountered.
And it always fits our kind of thing that we always moan about on that's like
big time moaners.
No, that's like a UK term, right? When you guys don't,
Yeah, no, that's
cool. Always moaning about something, right, Jacob?
Yeah.
Oh boy! Hey,
oh boy! I hope you don't stir up things. Are you going to find yourself in a row with some of these listeners? Okay.
No, we always go on about this where we're like, and we did it at the top of this episode. We want to see some weird UFOs that are like made of something that we can't. Like, what if the UFO was just made of like gamma waves, and that's the UFO? It doesn't actually have a physical corporeal form. It's like. Or maybe some other kind of wave on the light spectrum that we can't see with our naked eye, or that appears as just colors to us, but is, so that's what it's always very fascinating to us to look at that case. Cause at this point we haven't seen anything kind of similar to it.
Yeah. I've never seen that kind of resembled that Tehran UFO. So it's a cool like encounter. And not a very good explanation, which I think it checks a lot of boxes for us in being very intriguing.
I find that whole magnetic spectrum thing quite interesting with UFO cases, because it seems like you could make an argument that is kind of like what, if there is a phenomenon or if there is craft, that's kind of what it's interfering with, because that seems to be the case with like most sightings or like close up incidents, isn't it? Like the electricity things go out, or like the cameras stop working. And it's even the same at crop circles. Like when you go to crop circles with like EMF detectors and stuff, there is like weird energy spikes. I know not at all of them, but like some of the more unexplainable ones, because obviously there are occasionally people in fields with wooden boards like slapping them down. But there is like a weird electro like kind of like energy phenomena happening around that. And at the same time, that seems to be something that's very like similar and connected to like the whole consciousness thing. And I wonder if like the two are two. Like I wonder if there is something up there, whether or not it's like technology that interfaces with like consciousness, but it just messes with those kind of like spectrums, and that's how it's able to dip in and out of like how people can see it, like it warps phases in and out or anything like that. Because I think as well, and I'm sorry if I got this one wrong for any listeners, but I think I'm right with this. There's a paper that got released in China about how if you superconduct mercury, it has like a few anti-gravity kind of like things to it. I don't know what the correct word is, but properties to it. So like it can resist certain forms of it. And I find that interesting because when a lot of people talk about UFO sightings, it's always either a dark gray or a shiny gray. And that is kind of like what mercury is, isn't it? And I can almost imagine that, like, I wonder if there's any tie with that, because it's the same with Tic Tac and everything. You know what I mean? When they talk about what the shape of it is or how it moves or how it reflects light, you could almost imagine like a blob of mercury in the sky, couldn't you?
Yeah, that's a good point.
See, we're into that.
Yeah, I would love to be inside a spacecraft made of liquid mercury.
It'd be like the Capri Sun commercial.
Yeah, exactly. This would be like the secret life of Alex Mack.
I don't know if you guys have Capri Suns over there, but
we do. Are they the little like
pouches?
Yeah, you stick.
Yeah, foil pouches.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the advertising for it, where the kids turn into like blobs of liquid?
No.
Oh,
okay. Well.
That's what we were referencing.
I got to say, I do love American snacks, right? Because
really?
Yeah.
I've only heard that our chocolate can't hold a candle to Cadbury and some of the others you've got over there in the UK.
No,
I've heard that Cadbury has been going downhill, possibly.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there. So
Wow.
I don't know if you know, but I'm actually like half American, half my family live out in Texas too. So I regularly like come back and forth through that. I've actually been in Chicago once, but it was only passing through on a connection flight. So I didn't actually go out. I just flew over the lakes and it was mega snowy and cold. And I was like, oh,
Yeah, it's classic Chicago.
but I'm obsessed with like flaming hot Cheetos, Lifesavers, Tootsie Rolls, like all of that stuff. Pop Tarts. I can eat
Tootsie Roll, a Chicago confection.
That's true.
I can eat that until the end of days. So like,
Wow.
it's always quite funny when I'm in America. I feel really British, and then when I'm in Britain, I feel a little bit American because I like American snacks and food. But then when I'm out there, I miss like my British things, like my salt and vinegar crisps and stuff like that. But
What do our salt and vinegar chips like? Is it comparable at all? What are you?
Our crisps.
Yeah, our crisps. I should say.
oh
Crisps.
yeah, sorry, I'm
Yeah,
calling them crisps because they're
they're
chips
crisps.
to you, aren't
I
they?
don't want to say chips, not fries, but potato chips. I mean, so
Yeah.
crisps.
Yeah,
Are they different?
I'd say a little bit, but I lean more towards like the whole like corn-based one, like the Dorito tortilla chip kind of thing. Because here they're all, like you're saying, just potato-based, and we have like salt and vinegar, cheese and onion, prawn cocktail, like very rich, savory flavors. And I'm all into like my spices and my cheeses. So American snacks just suit me over there.
Well,
Wow.
we'll put cheese on anything. In the USA. The more cheese, the merrier.
But I've just noticed the time, so we should probably think about closing up the episode. So
Hey, we got all the time in the world, Jacob. We'll hang out with you until the sun comes up,
We won't stop talking.
or I guess for us the sun goes down.
Oh.
So have you guys got anything else that you want to like promote with Mr. Bunker Time's conspiracy podcast? Have you got any future stuff coming up? Any fancy episodes that you guys can plug, or is it all under wraps because obviously Mr. Bunker decides everything?
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. We don't know when this episode will air, but there's a very specific little episode coming out soon with a dapper UK gent who wink, who will I think we're covering a topic that is very fun, very in your wheelhouse, Jacob.
Yep.
That is involving space travel and like whether or not the elites of society have a secret space program allowing them to colonize other planets and travel interstellarly.
Well, technically, it would be intrastellar travel.
Interstellar travel.
Within our own solar system.
Based on a UK TV program. So, very fun episode that whenever that airs, you should definitely check that out. But if not, we've got good stuff coming out every single week. The listeners, the bunk bunkers like you, Jacob, have suggested some amazing topics that we run past the bunker files to see whether we should cover them or not. And they always end up great. And I think that's about it for us.
I was going to say as well, for like any of my listeners now, like this podcast is great if you definitely want weekly content. Like, I don't think you guys have ever, I think it's only been once since I've listened to you that you've not put an episode out that week. And I think it was like massive technical difficulties. But I think in like 2 years, you've pretty much put one out every single week. And that's always good because that's something I'm not notorious for. This podcast is just random. It's whenever I get a guest, and kind of the same with Infinite Void whenever me and Matty are free to sit down. So if people want reoccurring content, definitely go and check out the podcast, and I will be sure to put all of you guys' links down in the description for this. So if you don't want to type it all in, you can just go to the description below on this and check it out, and there'll be links to go and check all their stuff out. But yeah, guys, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been a long time coming, like we said, and hopefully we can do a part 2 and part 3 in the future at some point.
Yeah. This has been a long time in the making, and I can't believe it took us this long to do this. So we should definitely make this a more frequent occurrence.
Yeah, I think so too. That would be awesome. Well, thank you again, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us, Jacob. And I mean, yeah, we're so grateful that you asked us to be on.
Hi everyone, it's me again. I just wanted to say I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you want to follow us on social media, it's at Strange Times on Twitter and at Stranger Times on Instagram. So head over there and give us a follow to keep up to date with episode announcements and when new episodes are going to be dropping. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to give us a nice review because it helps with ranking and getting the podcast in the charts. And if you're listening on Spotify, make sure you're following us so you can be notified when new episodes come out. Thank you.